Welcome to the AZ900 Crash Course, Zero to Cloud in 7 Days. A manufacturing ops lead with 15 years on-prem experience thought he knew servers. He lifted his ERP to Azure, oversized every VM like he was buying physical hardware, and 3 months later his bill tripled what he'd budgeted. He'd missed the one concept that separates cloud professionals from cloud tourists: the consumption model. Don't be that person. Cloud skills shortages are real, and the gap is widest at the foundational level, the exact zone the AZ900 covers. Here's your first move. Go to Microsoft Learn's AZ900 Learning Path. Spend 20 minutes reviewing the exam skills, outline, and mark the domains you already know. That simple audit gives you a personalized study map before you invest a single dollar. The AZ900 is not just a badge, it's a mental operating system. It gives you the 50,000-foot view of Azure, cloud concepts, the core services, pricing models, SLAs, and the security and compliance landscape. Study it once, and you'll stop making the assumption that a VM is just a server in the sky. You'll know that costs accrue per second and that an open port is an invitation. And recruiters' bots? They screen for this cert because they know it means you won't walk in with on-prem brain and nuke a month's budget on day one. The AZ900 exam covers several critical domains. Cloud concepts is the why, public, private, hybrid models, and consumption economics. The biggest chunk is Azure architecture and services. The what? Regions, availability zones, core services. Management and governance covers the how, policies, RBAC, cost management. And security and identity is the defense. Entra ID, Defender, Network Security. Understanding these helps you place your study bets efficiently. A mid-sized logistics firm decided to lift and shift its legacy inventory system to Azure. The IT director, a seasoned Windows admin who'd avoided cloud training, left default network security group rules open and put SQL Server on a public IP with unchanged credentials. Within days, a bot scanning for common ports brute-forced its way in, dropped ransomware, and encrypted the order history table. Recovery took nearly a week, revenue took a huge hit, and the board demanded answers. This wasn't a nation-state attack. It was a predictable consequence of ClickOps confidence, feeling productive while ignoring foundational security. The logistics admin assumed Microsoft would handle the operating system's security. After all, it's the cloud, right? But the shared responsibility model says otherwise. With IaaS, you own everything inside the OS. If he'd studied AZ900, he'd have known that the customer is responsible for patching, credential hygiene, and network configurations. He'd have also set a $5 cost threshold alert in Azure Cost Management, which would have flagged the inflated spend on day 2 before the ransomware even hit. Had the admin used private endpoints and VNet integration, that SQL database wouldn't have been on the public internet at all. Azure Advisor, one of the exam's governance tools, would have immediately detected the exposed endpoint and the stale credentials. The exam covers Advisor as part of the cost, security, and operational recommendations it offers. Don't skip that module because it sounds boring. It's what would have stopped this breach. 40 hours of focused study on the AZ900 fundamentals builds the mental guardrails that prevent disasters like untagged resources, open public endpoints, and privilege escalations. That's one work week to understand the cloud accountability model versus the cost of a preventable breach or a wasted weekend untangling an Excel maze. The exam fee is always cheaper than the aftermath of ignorance. Spin up a free Azure account, click through a portal tutorial, and you'll have a VM running in minutes. It feels like success. But behind that quick deploy are defaults you didn't choose. A network configuration that may conflict with your existing setup, a public IP exposed to the internet, no tags for cost tracking, and overly broad permissions that can lead to data exposure. That's ClickOps confidence, the most dangerous shortcut in cloud. You're building on sand, and you won't know it until the first invoice or security incident. When you spin up a VM in the portal without specifying networking, Azure automatically creates a virtual network with a default address space and one default subnet. If your on-premises HQ already uses a similar range, and many do, the moment you try to peer the two networks, the peering fails because of address overlap. The only fix is to tear down the entire resource group and redeploy with a properly scoped address space. That's the kind of architectural mistake you avoid when you start with the AZ900, not the Create button. Exposed RDP ports attract bot scans almost immediately. Every VM you spin up with a default public endpoint and no just-in-time access hands criminals a clock that's already ticking. The number of unauthorized access attempts climbs fast, and simple credential spray attacks can succeed if your defaults are weak. Before you break for lunch, turn on just-in-time VM access in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. It's a concrete step that shuts down the attack surface. When your manager asks for a cost breakdown by department next month, untagged resources leave you with only one option. Export raw usage data into Excel and burn a Friday afternoon trying to make sense of it. Apply department, project, and environment tags on every resource from day one. It's 5 extra seconds per create, and it saves the weekend you'll never get back. Granting the owner role too broadly means a junior teammate can modify Azure RBAC assignments. Owner and User Access Administrator include the permission to assign roles, even data plane roles like Storage Blob Data Contributor. A person with owner can grant themselves that role and then delete your production backup container with no warning. Understand this control versus data plane boundary before handing out built-in roles. It's a core security concept the AZ900 covers, and it's what separates a cloud professional from a ClickOps accident waiting to happen. AZ900 is not a performance exam. There are no live labs. The question formats can vary, so check the current exam details on Microsoft Learn. Knowing the pattern in advance cuts test day anxiety in half. AZ900, AWS Cloud Practitioner, and Google Cloud Digital Leader all cover the same foundational terrain. They share heavy overlap on cloud economics, shared responsibility, and core service concepts. Pick one and the knowledge transfers fast. Once you know one cloud's vocabulary, the others are just translations. Compute is VMs or EC2 instances or compute engines. Storage is Blob or S3 or cloud storage. Identity is Entra ID, IAM, or cloud identity. Cost tools have different names but all do budgets and alerts. The underlying patterns stay the same: regions, zones, resource groups, policies, so you are never truly locked into one platform. AWS Cloud Practitioner places heavy weight on the well-architected framework. Its pillars cover everything from cost to sustainability. The exam also drills the shared responsibility model. AWS secures the physical layer, you secure the guest OS and data. This methodology-first approach trains you to think architecturally, not just recall service names. Google Cloud's Digital Leader certification tilts heavily toward data, AI, and ML. Expect questions about services like BigQuery and Vertex AI that don't appear on AZ900. Networking uses a single global VPC that spans all regions, with subnets assigned regionally, which is fundamentally different from Azure's regional VNet model. Pricing leads with sustained use discounts and committed use contracts, while Azure leans on reserved instances and hybrid benefit. The takeaway: foundational certs teach you principles, not just vendor-specific trivia. Once you know the concepts, switching between clouds is surprisingly fast. The fastest path to a pass starts with an honest audit. Download the official AZ900 skills outline, print it, and go line by line. If you can't explain a concept to a friend in plain language in under a minute, it's not exam ready. The gaps you find, especially around virtual network details like subnet delegation, become your study roadmap. Before you deploy a single resource, open the Azure portal, create a budget, and set a $10 monthly cap with email alerts. This one habit rewires your brain to associate every click with a cost line. It's the quickest way to move from cloud tourist to cloud professional, and it's a ritual I've seen save people thousands when they accidentally leave a VM running over a weekend. Next up, why you should study governance modules first, before you spin up anything you'll later regret paying for. Start your study where most people finish: governance and security. Learn RBAC, Azure Policy, and the Shared Responsibility Model first. When you finally deploy resources, you already think like a cloud operator. This reversed path prevents the ClickOps confidence that leads to costly surprises. Create a dedicated resource group for learning, not a project. Deploy one VM inside a VNet with an NSG you define yourself, spin up a function app, and provision a storage account with a lifecycle rule that automatically shifts blobs to cool after 30 days. While you're in the portal, check any resource's properties blade. You'll see its resource ID in the format. Subscriptions, YA ID, YA resource groups, YA RG, providers, YA namespace, YA type, YA fee, name. That's the universal addressing scheme for every Azure resource you'll ever script or automate. Record yourself saying this out loud. If I run SQL Server on a VM, Microsoft handles the physical host and hypervisor. I handle OS patches, SQL updates, encryption, and firewall. For PaaS like Azure, SQL Database, Microsoft manages the OS and SQL engine. I'm still responsible for encrypting data and setting firewall rules. Say it for every service type. The responsibility boundary moves with each model. If you skip this, you'll assume Microsoft's got your back on things they don't. Close your notes, set a timer, and take a full practice exam. When you get an answer wrong, don't just read the explanation. Launch the Azure portal right then and physically locate the blade or menu path the question referenced. That kinesthetic link, clicking the exact setting, cements retention far faster than passive rereading. It's the difference between knowing about a concept and knowing where to find it when your job depends on it. Turn a region into a city and availability zones into data centers in different floodplains, physically separate so a single disaster doesn't wipe out all copies. If you can't explain it to a non-IT friend in 60 seconds, you haven't internalized it yet. Use the stranger test for every AZ900 domain. The cloud skills gap isn't about knowing jargon. It's about translating it into decisions a business can act on. Don't wait until you feel fully prepared. That day never comes. Schedule your AZ900 exam at least a week out. The concrete deadline forces recall under pressure. Most exam providers let you reschedule for free with enough notice, so there's no real penalty for pushing it. But without a date, you'll study forever and never sit. Perpetual studying kills more cloud careers than the exam difficulty ever will. Right after passing, enable Microsoft Learn's connected learning to claim your digital badge. Post it on LinkedIn immediately. The credential is what recruiters filter by. The certification requires renewal, so check Microsoft's current policy. It often includes a free online assessment, saving you the exam fee. That badge signals you've built foundational cloud literacy that prevents disasters, not just memorized terms. Blob storage access tiers let you control cost versus access frequency. Hot tier has no retrieval charge but costs more per GB stored. Archive is cheapest to store, but retrieving data early can get expensive. Always match the tier to how often the data is actually accessed. Check the current pricing page before you upload, not after the bill arrives. Deploying a VM in a region that supports availability zones doesn't give you zone redundancy automatically. You must explicitly configure the zone settings when you create the VM. Otherwise, it stays in a single data center. The AZ900 exam explicitly teaches that zones are opt-in at creation. Forget this, and a data center failure means unplanned downtime. A common pitfall. You create a subscription-level Azure policy requiring a tag on every resource group. When a service like AKS creates its own managed resource group automatically, it has no such tag, and your policy blocks the deployment. The fix is straightforward. Edit the policy assignment and exclude the specific resource type that needs to manage its own resource groups. That tiny exclusion is what separates a smooth rollout from a dead end. Pay-as-you-go VMs are consumption-based. You pay per hour and can stop anytime. Reserved instances lock you into a term, so they don't follow that model. The AZ900 covers the consumption-based model, which mainly applies to serverless and certain PaaS services. Mix them up and you'll lose easy points. Azure Hybrid Benefit can reduce compute costs by letting you use your existing Windows Server licenses in Azure. Get in the habit of checking for this setting on every Windows VM you deploy. It's one of the fastest ways to trim your cloud bill. Third-party summaries paraphrase, but the exam may reference exact Azure portal paths. Spend at least one study session a week clicking through the portal yourself, using the menus Microsoft Learn calls out. That way, when you see Azure Advisor Cost on the test, it won't throw you off. A cloud engineer grants an application's service principal contributor role when it only needs reader and storage blob data contributor. That overpermission could lead to a breach if the application's code is compromised. The shared responsibility model says you must secure your identities and data. Least privilege is foundational on the AZ900. It only takes one unprotected account for an attacker to get in, even a legacy test account with a weak password. The AZ900 covers MFA and Entra ID fundamentals for exactly this reason. Set up conditional access policies to require MFA for every identity in your tenant. No exceptions. The service model sets your responsibility boundary. In IaaS, you own the OS and up. In PaaS, the provider handles the OS and middleware. In SaaS, they manage everything down to the app. The one constant: you are always responsible for your data and access management. Every Azure resource belongs to exactly one resource group and one subscription. Resource groups scope cost tracking and access control. You can tag them for filtering and apply role-based access at the group level. Cross-group dependencies are allowed, but they make cleanup tricky. Understanding resource groups is the difference between a manageable architecture and a tangled mess when the bill arrives. Availability sets protect within a single data center, while availability zones protect you from an entire data center outage. For critical workloads, combine them. Deploy VMs across multiple zones and use availability sets within each zone. Just remember to calculate composite SLA. Chaining services shrinks overall availability. A budget alert is just a notification after you've already crossed the threshold. To actively stop new resources, create an Azure policy with a deny effect. Policies cascade down your hierarchy. Test with an audit effect first, then enforce with deny or auto-remediate with deploy if not exists. Understanding these effects is essential for the exam and for real-world cost control. You've just built a cloud mindset, shared responsibility, consumption versus commitment, cost habits from the first click, and a study sequence that skips ClickOps confidence. The most expensive mistakes, ignored hybrid benefit, open endpoints, overprivileged roles, are now things you can spot and stop. But this is only the surface. Next up, Part 2, Cloud Concepts. Demystified, from On-Prem to Hyperscale. I'll see you there.